Alright everyone, so in this video we're going to be discussing why training harder is not always better and a lot of times can actually be counterproductive, okay? So first of all, you have to understand the fitness to fatigue model of exercise science, okay? Fitness to fatigue is basically the more accurate and medically accurate especially version of what used to be known as supercompensation, okay, which was pioneered by Hans Selye, whose works I have all of his books that I bought pretty cheap from Goodwill somehow, under $5, and they're like out of print. But basically, supercompensation is the idea that training or exercise creates a stress, and then your body needs dedicated time to recover from that stress. And then only once you're recovered from that stress, your body supercompensates and becomes a little bit stronger than it was before in order to protect itself from dying from that same stress in the future. But the reality is your body is always responding to stress in the environment. It's always adapting to stress in the environment, and it's always recovering from stress in the environment all at the same time. Recovery, stress, and adaptation, fitness and fatigue, they are always happening, and they're happening independent of each other. So your body doesn't need to fully recover in order to adapt, because adaptation and recovery are actually happening on their separate systems. They're happening on separate timelines. And anytime you squat, you go to the gym and you squat, anytime you go to MMA practice and you practice takedowns, anytime you throw a football, okay, all these activities, your body will immediately respond to that activity to try to get a little bit better. It's going to create fitness improvements, throwing the football. It's going to create more biological neural pathways that make that easier in the future. Practicing a takedown at MMA practice, your body's going to create neural pathways for that movement where it remembers how it felt and become a little bit better next time it tries to do such a thing. When you go and you squat a moderate 5 sets of 5 on back squat at the gym, your body's going to get a little bit better at squatting for 5 sets of 5, and it's going to get a little bit stronger. So literally, you need to think of training as a skill, because it literally is a skill. That is, in practice, yes, you're building muscle. Yes, your bones and your connective tissue and things are getting stronger and thicker. Your joints actually get bigger over time. You don't wear your body out, like a car, as you get older. No, your body gets stronger as long as you don't train too hard, which we're going to talk about in a bit. So your body is always adapting to the stimulus, to the activities you place it under. But at the same time, all of these activities will also create what's known as fatigue. Okay, so the adaptation that we just mentioned, the improvements, that's fitness. That's known as fitness. Okay, so what's known in exercise science as fatigue is going to be, let's say you're throwing a football, okay? The harder you throw that football, the more muscular damage is going to be placed on the shoulder girdle, provided throwing a football is not really a fatiguing or damaging exercise. But of course, if you throw it really hard, a lot, every single day, let's say, you can create what's known as overuse injuries, where your shoulder girdle starts to hurt a little bit. That is a cumulative damage over time that your body has not adequately recovered from for whatever reason. So you'll literally stack damage on top of itself over time, and it needs recovery, okay? That doesn't mean throwing the same football the same way over time is bad. It doesn't mean doing the same thing over time creates overuse injuries. Overuse injuries happen when you train too hard, too often, with too much volume. Okay. So anyway, a better example would be lifting weights. Okay. If you're squatting a 5x5, okay, 5 sets of 5 reps, your body's going to get a little bit better every time you do that. But the problem is, if you're doing 5 sets of 5 on back squat and the weight is too close to your maximum capabilities, what happens is your body's the stress of that training is so high that whatever adaptations you create from that workout are not going to be obvious because of the stress. Your body, next time you come and you try to squat, if you squat too soon, you're not going to be able to train within an effective intensity. Because your body's still trying to recover from that previous workout, because that previous workout was too stressful to be able to recover from in a short enough time to train again soon enough. And at the same time, the more often that you do a specific task, whether it's throwing a football, shooting a takedown, or squatting a heavy 5x5, so your body's getting better and better every time. Every time it sees that same stress, it'll be less and less stressful the more frequently you expose yourself to it. The problem, though, is your body is also becoming less and less sensitive to improvements. For example, if you're shooting a takedown, okay, and the first time you learn how to shoot a takedown in MMA or wrestling, it's brand new. You've never fucking done it before, so you don't know how. But there's only so many times you need to learn how to do the same takedown. The more you practice at it, the better you get. But eventually, your body stops improving at shooting that takedown because you've already learned every single thing you need to know about a takedown. Now, provided you can get more and more powerful at shooting that takedown, as long as the intention is to shoot it faster or to shoot it harder. But the thing is, if you're constantly trying to shoot that takedown at the same speed, the same intensity, within the same context, there's only so much improvements you can make on the same technique over time. And eventually you'll no longer get better at shooting that takedown. Okay? The good thing is shooting a takedown is not really that stressful unless you're in live wrestling practice and you're going balls to the wall. Then you're going to be pretty tired and exhausted, right? But that's a whole nother skill that you're developing in live wrestling practice. The same thing happens with throwing a football. Okay? The more you do it, the better you get. But the better you get at throwing a football, the less improvements you will have to be able to make. And so it gets to a point where you're so efficient at that movement that if you ever want to get better at it, you've got to change a perimeter. Okay? Now you can work on sprinting backwards while throwing the football. Or in wrestling takedowns, you can work a different takedown. Instead of a double leg takedown, work a single leg. Or you can work, shooting that same takedown at different distances from different angles, or add on like an ankle pick to the takedown or something like that. Chain it together. Or, do it on someone who's a different size than you. Okay? But the point is, this goes for all training adaptations, okay? Stimulus, like stimulating an adaptation, can only happen when to movements that are at least a little bit novel, at least a little bit new. Because eventually you get so good at it that your body is no longer going to be able to get any better, okay? And a lot of people look at strength training and think that it's somehow different, but it's really not, okay? So in regards to strength training, okay, This is where it seems a little bit like it's different, but it's really not. If you do 5 sets of 5 reps, okay, and you try to add 5 pounds every single time, when you first start that program, you will be able to consistently get stronger and add 5 pounds and add 5 pounds. But eventually you're going to hit a point where your body literally will not adapt to that 5 sets of 5 back squat anymore. It will not improve its strength from that same 5 sets of 5 reps because you've been doing that same exact 5 sets of 5 reps on squats for 6 months. It is no longer sensitive to adapting to that anymore because it's seen that same thing over and over again. It no longer needs to improve. It's like, oh, I'm so good at it. You basically run the adaptations dry. And so your body doesn't respond anymore because it's basically gotten bored of it. It's gotten old, basically. The same way that shooting the same takedown over and over again, your body literally just, it has no reason to adapt anymore. Because the only reason it was going to adapt in the first place is to save itself from dying. Now, the problem that people get into is when they think adding more weight to a movement is a primary driver of training adaptations. The reality is, if adding more weight to a strength training exercise was a driver of progress, then you would be able to just do a 1 rep max and keep adding weight, and your body will just keep getting stronger. But the fact of the matter is, anyone who's ever tried that, they'll notice, as long as doing a 1 rep max is new to you, your body will get stronger at it. But after like 4 weeks, you start to get overuse injuries, you start to get this overwhelming sense of fatigue and tiredness, and your body no longer gets better. You don't get stronger anymore because you've been doing the same 1 rep max over and over again. Believe it or not, you will get stronger for 4 weeks. It's no longer new. But the thing is, you will notice, even though your body's got way, way better at it, because you keep trying to add weight and your body is not improving strength anymore, you're literally just training at maximal intensity all the time. And so back to fitness to fatigue, you are creating more fatigue, more damage, but you're not creating an adaptation. The reason why fitness to fatigue is important to understand, and that supercompensation is not what's actually happening, is if supercompensation, the act of your body's like, oh shit, I almost died, I need to recover from that stress that almost killed me, and then become a little bit stronger than before to prevent myself from dying when I see that same stress in the future. The reason why it's important to understand that that's not the case is because, let's say you're doing the 5x5 and you keep adding 5 pounds. If adding 5 pounds and adding more weight over time is what was driving progress, then you would never hit a plateau on a 5x5. And you would just be able to keep getting stronger. But the thing is, it is not supercompensation that's happening. It is not recovering from adding more weight to the bar that is driving the improvements in strength. It is actually the learning of that movement, like the fact that it is something your body has not seen before. Not as far as intensity, but the actual exercise itself that is causing your body to change. Okay? Now, this is controversial, but if you understand what I'm really saying, I'm not saying muscle confusion, but this is a pretty well-established phenomenon that you can see in practice and that is verified by scientific literature. So, of course, you can change the rep range. Okay, so if you look at old school training programs, they'll do like a block periodization, or basically where they'll have phases. They'll have like 1 month of 3 sets of 10, then 1 month of 3 sets of 5, then 1 month of 3 sets of 3. And that's just an example, not exact parameters. And that worked. That's how a lot of old school trainers and world champions trained. And people will say it's because of muscle building or they come up with all this other stuff. But the fact is, it's because you're keeping the stimulus fresh. You're keeping the training fresh. And so your body is needing to constantly adapt to the training. Whereas if you are doing the same thing year round, like your body, you'll get really strong, but eventually you got to change something. And you'll notice a lot of what a lot of people will do to get around it. Like they're in the squat every day kind of paradigm where you just squat to a max every single day. People, like, you'll get really, really strong for 4 weeks. For me, I always put on 20 to 30 pounds onto every movement the bench press, usually the pods, bench press, and the squat within two weeks. But eventually, I notice I don't get stronger anymore. So what a lot of people do, though, is they change the variation. Instead of doing a back squat every day, they change it to a front squat for a while. They'll start rotating exercises. Okay? And the reason why is because your body responds to novelty. So when you change the reps on your strength exercise, you're changing the novelty. You're giving your body a new stimulus to adapt to, and therefore the staleness or whatever goes away, and you continue to make progress. Okay. So anyway, there's a huge problem where people don't think of things as skills, and they think, like I could just train harder, right? If I just train to failure all the time and grind out maxes, I'll just keep getting stronger because I'm putting my body under more stress than it was under before, and I'm giving my body a reason to adapt. So what happens when you train this way is you create more damage and more fatigue. You'll get sore, you'll get tired, you'll get exhausted, you'll get burnt out, you'll get sick. And this is because pro-inflammatory cytokines, molecules that will float around, that your immune system will literally get burdened by trying to respond to recovering from that stress. And if your body's not adapting to training, all you're going to do is keep getting stressed over and over again. Let's say you're doing a hard sparring session, a hard MMA sparring session, and you're going balls to the wall. Number one, sparring hard is a performance or it's a test. It is not training. Training is basically the act of practicing in order to improve. When you're doing hard sparring, you are not going to be able to improve and practice techniques that your coach taught you, at least not as effectively as if you were doing lighter submaximal sparring. The reason why is because you're more scared about, you're more concerned with winning. You're more concerned with scoring points. You're more concerned with preventing yourself from getting scored on. Or you're more concerned about knocking the guy out and not getting punched or not getting kicked. Okay? When you're focused on winning, right? When you're focused on knocking your opponent out or whatever, scoring points, you're not going to be it's a lot harder to practice head movement or jabbing or footwork because you're under pressure. Too much pressure to focus on technique. What happens is your natural fighting skills kick in, or your instincts, which you're already good at. Okay? And you can try to numb yourself to pressure or think like, the more I train hard, the easier it'll get. But it's just a lot easier to develop bad habits when you're training too hard. The same thing goes for lifting weights. The closer to maximal intensity that you train, the more you're going to grind out reps. Okay? And you do get better at grinding out reps, but still, the same thing especially applies to a sport. If you're like, you don't see professional football players, always like their training is always 100%. No, they're doing drills. They're doing kind of like submaximal parts of the actual sport, of the actual game. Same thing goes for sprinters, Olympic level sprinters. They'll do submaximal sprint intervals. They might do a maximum sprint every now and then. They'll do aerobic capacity work. They'll do bicycling, and they'll do strength training. They have a variety of training modalities, and most of it's submaximal. And then they'll have a little bit of maximal training kicked in. Because the reason why is because if they just sprint 100% all the time, what's going to happen is they're going to develop overuse injuries, knee problems, ankle problems. They'll accumulate muscle soreness without actually improving too much, because training improvements don't happen when you're going maximum intensity. Only at the beginning, sure. But that's why, generally speaking, the closer you get to competition, the harder you'll train, because you're peaking yourself for competition. Okay, just like powerlifting, they don't train 1 rep maxes year round, even though that's what their sport is about. They train with submaximal volumes and intensities, or moderate volumes, higher frequencies, and submaximal intensities to build strength over time. And then the closer they get to competition, the more 1 rep maxes they will do. Because if they train 1 rep maxes all the time, all that's going to happen is there's too much fatigue or too much damage and not enough adaptation. It takes away from their ability to actually improve. Imagine a marathon runner who is planning to compete in a 100-mile marathon, and they are trying to run 100-mile runs every week, even once a week. A lot of times these people need like a whole month to recover from their actual competition. They will break their training down into smaller, more manageable increments so that they can maximize training improvements and minimize the amount of damage and tiredness that they will get. Okay? They'll do 20-mile runs like every now and then. They'll do a lot more like 5 to 10-mile runs. And then they'll do speed work and sprint intervals and a little bit of strength training and bicycling and swimming in order to build their improvements in performance so that when they finally run that 100-mile run, they have a wide base of training that they improved upon, and that 100-mile run is the performance. But when you try to train too hard in powerlifting, you try to max out all the time, or if you're an MMA fighter and you're doing hard sparring all the time, or you're a jiu-jitsu athlete and you're always trying to just go balls to the wall 100%, the same thing applies. Like, you reinforce bad habits, you injure yourself more often or make yourself at a higher risk of injury, you get more aches and pains, and you reinforce bad habits. That Kimura that your teacher was telling you to change a little bit of details on in class earlier, good luck trying to remember those small details when you're going 100% with someone and they're trying to submit you 100%. When you're focused on winning and sparring, you're going to reinforce bad habits and you're not going to improve. I've seen too many beginners at Muay Thai class who start off and they're going 100% on the heavy bag. They're not focusing on technique or anything. They're just going balls to the wall because they think, I'll get better cardio and I'll be able to hit harder and stuff. They develop shoulder pain. And then during sparring, they just go with haymakers, man. They're like a wild freaking monkey just going ham. And I'm just going 10%, and I'm just jabbing them in the face every time. Think about a professional boxer, or not even a professional. Think about someone who's been boxing for 2 years, and they're sparring with a beginner who's never boxed before. They say they learned on the streets, bro, and they come into your boxing academy. And so effort versus proper submaximal technique. This is what we're comparing here. Okay, so you have a 2-year boxer who has a good jab because he's practiced that jab and controlled sparring over and over again. He knows distance management, footwork, and he's okay, right? Then you have a beginner who's never boxed before, right? And he comes in, and the beginner's like, man, I'm just going to give it 100% because effort is what wins matches. So he's the beginner's like going ham, and he's giving it all he's got. He's 100%. And the boxer who's only been boxing for 2 years, he'll do 25%. But he's just using his jab. Okay? A properly timed jab with decent footwork and proper understanding of distance management against someone who's coming at you 100%, you could actually knock someone out with a light jab, kind of like almost like Anderson Silva versus Forrest Griffin, but that was a freak accident, right? Imagine this guy off the street, never boxed before, coming at you with haymakers, giving it 100% effort, and you're just kind of keeping him the distance with the jab, and you just pop him in the jaw at the right angle, and you time it just right as he's coming in 100%. You can knock him out with a 25% effort jab, okay? Because, knockouts don't need you to, like, necessarily hit hard. But not to say that that's, you should hit hard, right? But I'm just saying, 2 years of proper training versus someone who just does effort. And another thing is if that guy who's just going 100% balls to the wall, right, who never boxed before, if he does 2 years of training, okay, and he stays doing 100% balls to the wall sparring and heavy bag work, even if he does drilling and stuff like that, and his instructor tells him over and over again to throw his punches straight and to cover his face, I guarantee you someone who comes in and they're only training at a RPE of 7, let's just say, out of 10, but that newbie trains at a RPE of 10. Here's what's going to happen. The guy who's training 100% all the time, every single day, he's not going to be able to come consistently because he's going so hard all the time that he's going to develop pains and aches, and he's going to need more time to recover, especially if he's doing hard sparring. And imagine that newbie who's going 100% in sparring, and he's sparring with the pro fighters, he's sparring with the intermediate fighters. They're going to go pretty hard too, right? Not that they need to, but a lot, especially if you're going 100% as a beginner and you're facing someone who's been at the gym for 2 years. At the 2-year mark, you're still in that I don't give a fuck type of attitude, while at the same time having a decent amount of skill. You're probably those guys usually have no problem, going 100% back because they still haven't learned, effectively relaxing and stuff like that. So they're going to knock that fucker out. And so the point is, though, the newbie going 100% over 2 years is going to get more concussions, he's going to get more overuse injuries, and he's going to have more bad habits and less good technique. I see this all the time. But then you have someone who's new, and they just want to learn, and they want to get better, and they train at like an RP 6 to 8, but they'll go 100% if their instructor tells them to, right? Or insists that they do, right? In the first 2 years, I don't think you should go 100% either way. But nonetheless, a little bit of hard training is important. And if you're a competitor, hard training is important the closer you get to fighting, to your actual fight. And maybe once a week have like a hard sparring day. But the rest should be submaximal, where you build good technique over time. And then on the hard sparring day, you'll see where you're at. But every day should not be a test. Should not be a competition. But anyway, the person who does submaximal training most of the time for 2 years, they're not going to have concussions. They're not going to develop respiratory infections and sickness from so-called overtraining syndrome, the pro-inflammatory cytokines that build up. They are not going to have their knuckles hurt and their elbows are achy. They're not going to have insomnia at night. These things happen when you train too hard too frequently. These are overreaching symptoms is a proper term, but it's what people will call overtraining. So submaximal training, you'll be able to train every day and feel great. You'll build more fitness, okay? You'll build more cardiovascular fitness. You'll build more aerobic fitness. You'll build better technique, okay? You'll build better habits, okay? This goes for strength training. This goes for football. This goes for running, endurance. This goes for MMA and combat sports. This goes for everything. Now, the thing is, though, you can't be training too easy either, okay? Training too easy would be like, all right, I always go for the same takedown and submit people. Imagine you're a black belt and all you train with is white belts. Like, maybe you'll get better because you'll get better at, like, I guess, offense and submitting people, like, within 5 seconds. But if you're a black belt, in order for you to really improve, you would need, like, to roll with, like, at least maybe a brown belt. I think purple belts, it just depends on the people, right? But to really maximize improvements, you can't just be, like, training super easy all the time. But you need to kind of gauge, you need to be able to train within a zone. There's an effective zone, okay? Training too easy, it's kind of like the flow state, you know? If you've ever heard of the flow state and you understand the science on flow, you understand training too easy doesn't put you in flow. It's too easy, it's boring. Training too hard doesn't put you in a flow state because it's too hard. You're like, this is too stressful. You got to train in the right zone. Like a RP 6 to a maximum to like 8.5. That's the zone. And for improving performance, it should be in that range too. Okay? Doesn't matter what sport. It doesn't matter what characteristic, whether it's cardio, conditioning, strength, power. You can't be training balls to the wall all the time. But again, especially if you're competing, especially if you're a fighter, especially for the mentality and the mindset, yeah, you should have at least 1 day a week where you go hard, where you go as hard as, maybe not as hard as you can, but you should be approaching an RP 9, right? Or in 10 periodically in that session. But you can't do that every day, especially in combat sports. Combat sports, literally the whole purpose is knocking the guy out, breaking his arm, basically almost like as close to you can get as killing someone in like a competition setting, right? If you're going 100% all the time, bad things are going to fucking happen, okay? However, when you're 4 weeks out from competition, you need to have a lot more harder training, okay? But the thing is, again, when you're doing 100% max effort, all you're going to be able to do is perform the things you've already built through proper training. Okay? If you don't have good head movement already, good luck trying to practice and get better at your head movement during hard sparring. Okay? And if you're not doing punches to the face and you're just like, hard to the body and only tapping to the face, a lot of people just keep their hands down and just block to the body, and they'll just let punches to the face come. And all that's going to do is reinforce the subconscious habit of keeping your hands down. And you're not going to be able, you're not going to develop better head movement or getting better at blocking to the face, or at least being concerned about that. It'd be a lot easier for you to get knocked out in the future. Even if you're still bobbing your head, it's like not a huge deal during training. You need to train in a way that's realistic, but at the same time prevents you from getting concussed and hurt and stuff like that. So it's a hard kind of thing to balance, right? But even something like wrestling practice, if you're always doing hard takedowns, your back's going to be, you're going to have back problems, hip problems, knee problems. Like, it's going to be pretty bad. So, there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, man, like injuries and soreness and pains, it's just part of the sport. If you're doing powerlifting, you're going to get hurt. You're going to get injured. You're going to be sore. If you're doing jiu-jitsu, it just comes with the sport. That's not true if you're training within the range I'm talking about. The reason why people get injured is because usually because they're training at an intensity in which their body is not adapted to. And newsflash, just kind of to reinforce this, anything above an RP 8, the more you train at RP 8, the higher and higher that RP 8 goes, right? So if I'm sparring with someone and I'm a beginner, right now my RP 8 is going to look pretty bad. But after 5 years of training at an RP 8, my RP 8 is going to look pretty fucking good. Okay, think about a white belt training at RP 8 and a black belt training at RP 8. The black belt they don't even need to go at an RP of 4 to submit a white belt. A white belt can be going at 100%. Okay? And the black belt is going to be able to submit that white belt not even putting 20% effort. So it's important, like people think, oh no, you got to go 100% all the time to get better. That's not true. Just by training, if you train at RPE 6, your RPE 6 gets better. You don't want to be competing in competition and need to go to 100%. Okay? What you want to do is improve your 80% so much that your 80% is light years better than your opponent's 100%. Again, you can't control how much percentage you'll be doing in competition. So you always need to be improve, going 100% periodically. But it's not effective to always go 100%. So anyway, this is a pretty complex and nuanced subject, but I think it's important for people to understand. If the closer you go to like an RP 10 or to 100%, at a higher, and the more often you train that way, the shorter and shorter your career is going to be, and it just doesn't make sense. It's like you don't have to go 100% all the time. Like that's not how skills are acquired. If you look at skill, the science of skill acquisition, and skill improvement, you'll see that that there is an effective range, and skills become harder and harder to develop with the more pressure or the closer you get to like 100% application, right? Like, even like something like school, right? Developing intellectual capacity. Let's say you go to college, right? You don't just do the final exam all of the time, or you don't just do essays all of the time. You're right. Your professor will usually make you do like short little paragraphs and this and that, and they'll do little quizzes and stuff to prepare you for those exams. Because an exam is a test of what you already know. Okay? An essay is a test of what you're already capable of. Okay? But little quizzes throughout the semester, they are tiny little kind of like quizzes that prime your brain to improve your current understanding of the knowledge. They're practice and improvement. Okay? If you're always taking the final exam, you're going to be you're going to need to go back in the book and try to improve anyway. So anyway, competing year round does not make sense. You're just demonstrating the skills that you've already acquired. You're not improving as you compete. You improve during training. You improve during practice. Okay, competing is not practice. I mean, you're practicing competing, but like you need to practice that mindset and that grit and that performing under pressure. But you're not going to improve your skills that way. Your actual skills that you can perform. And just drilling and then competing is not going to work either. So anyway, yeah, I mean, I've seen this in a lot of Muay Thai gyms. It's kind of like the American Kickboxing Academy's way of doing things too. And you see how short their careers are, except for like Daniel Cormier, I guess. But like you don't want to develop Parkinson's disease or dementia by the age of 40. Like, so you don't want to have hip problems and stuff, especially if it's not necessary to actually improve. Like, why the fuck are you going to beat yourself up when skill acquisition doesn't happen by training at that maximal intensity? There's no, you could easily get as good or even better adaptations otherwise. And then you're like crippled by the age of 30. Like, it doesn't make sense. What good is becoming a world champion if you can only hold that title for like 2 years and then you just like have to end your career abruptly? Look at George St. Pierre and how healthy he is, and his coaches, John Danaher. If you look at the way Gordon Ryan and Nick Rodriguez, look at the way that they train. And Nick Rodriguez learned, they train this way. They picked this up from them. Like they do a lot of flow rolling. If you look at especially Nick Rodriguez, he does flow wrestling, flow rolling. They do a lot of positional live rolling. So let's say I have one person hold my leg, right? They start with a leg to finish a takedown, and my main goal is to defend the takedown and get my leg out of there, right? And they're doing their best to try to take me down to the ground, right? Provided they don't have to slam me. Like, really, what benefit am I going to get from getting slammed? I mean, anyway, like slammed hard, right? Like they could slam, but gently, gently slam, right? Anyway, regardless, so that's a controlled environment type of thing where you have a focused intention. You're not worried about what happens once you hit the ground and all this. You're just worried about defending the takedown. And you're defending that takedown at 100% intensity. That's going to be a very easy way to get better at defending a takedown, right? Defending a single leg at a high intensity without accumulating too much fatigue and damage, right? But especially if they're slamming me 100% every single time, after, like 10 slams, I mean, my back's going to be hurting. It's like you'd be way better at doing that same drill for like 30 to 60 minutes. I mean, that's a long time at a submaximal intensity than doing it for 10 minutes at a high intensity. The more practice you get, the better you get at that, to the point where it's like, you don't even need to practice as much anymore, necessarily, but you should still. Another thing is like pass or sweep, or like for Muay Thai, you could do one person attacks, the other person defends, right? Which, or you could do one person is throwing jabs and crosses, and then the other person is just moving their head and defending, right? And they're just moving around. Like, they're not going 100%, but they're practicing a very specific type of thing. And then, of course, you can raise the intensity, especially if you're an elite fighter, where the person attacking starts to try to go harder, And your main goal is to shell up and kind of move around and stuff. Now, of course, and that's a really good conditioning workout as well as developing skill. Of course, just defending without being able to counterpunch, I mean, that, I don't know, gets a little ridiculous sometimes. Anyway, so it's just like ideas. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. This is like the third time I try to make this video. And hopefully it's made sense, and I'll talk to y'all next time.